Okay. So good evening, everybody. My name is Panagiotis Μένεγο. I'm a journalist and radio presenter, and I'm very happy standing next to this guy, Mr. Ranaldo, a figure that played such a vital role in shaping the alternative universe we've all been part of in the past or in present, and we're still using it as a point of reference and inspiration. He needs no introduction. His artistic contribution is so vast, but I think we can watch some videos and maybe we'll get our conversation going. Do you agree?
I do. Now, he's going to speak English and I'm going to speak Greek, okay? We're going to start with about 24 minutes presentation of 5 different videos that I've been showing on this tour. Some points of reference, some places to start. An early video by the composer Glenn Branca, who I worked with in the early days. I'm sorry, we didn't print the program that we have prepared. A video from Sonic Youth 2004 or something like that, and an early spoken word film that I made, and a couple other documents of performances. And then we'll come up and have a conversation, and at some point we'll open it up to audience questions if you have anything to ask. And so we'll start with some films and see you in 24 minutes.
No guitars involved.
Oh, and then we're going to go up to the roof and I will play a concert.
Okay.
Okay, that's when the guitars will be involved.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and... You want to do this for video? Play it out? Get the right notes? Okay? We want this to be good. Again, please, on that measure 7. Measure 7, here we go. Ready, and...
watch as the whole country slides by below the wing. Deep red clays and burned out browns, followed by snow-bleached peaks, and now the flat geometry of the Middlelands. Hundreds of miles of patchwork squares and circles, an occasional building group here or there, isolated, and tiny city clusters shrinking in their capillary sprawl, gray and lifeless from above. What is this all about? The ground moving does not really alter my perspective up here. Nothing seems to affect my view these days. My life beyond stable, static. 35 years, 10 years, almost 5 years. All these timeline hash marks seem to have ground into a halt. How do dreams and hopes end up frozen? How can I get back that burning desire? I'm at a standstill now. The days go in and out and I get nowhere. Still no great clang of astonishment, no brilliant flash of light, no steeple with a wide view. All that surrounds me, all the things I have gathered and continue to gather at such an obscene rate, seem to be stones tied to the cuff, weights to make the freedom of the river that much harder to realize. And all these stupid metaphors. What is one to do? The idea of chucking it all seems so inviting, to throw myself headlong into a love affair, some beautiful unknown person, or a trip off alone in the wilds, never looking back. But I can't help myself, I must always look back. Life so beautiful in the rear view, everything in golden light and very still. Faces, and places, feelings, thoughts, and bomb forever. That wall in Chapel Hill, Karen lying on the bed by that sun-shaded window, Johnson City, listening for footsteps and not yet through. The soft mountains green at 7 years old, and 8 and 9. Laurie's face in that photograph. The old Volkswagen parked by the gate of those brown fields, that red tractor leaving traces as it plodded across before Tom and I, our eyes wild with it. La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Los Angeles palm trees looming like endless flagpoles and reflected overhead in the rear windows like arching spiders. Hovering just 20 minutes ago above the cotton ball clouds. The first gig in Berlin. Mud Club with the gate coming down. The stained glass windows of St. Dom's seen close up, the movie camera view. All the envelopes full of tiny snapshots collecting dust. My mother as a small girl in a burnished white dress. My wife as a young mother. All the girls whose initials have been LS. The feeling of almost drowning beneath the placid blue surface. Kissing Mary in the dark. Old movies, my first attempts, all hazy and bleached out blue. Cody in his leather jacket. Amanda driving the old wrecked blue Plymouth across the Canadian landscape. My life in a frozen moment, a fly's eye faceted view of all the moments which make up the full strand. Do any of these moments mean even the slightest thing? Michael dragging off the opium pipe in the shaded green of his backyard. How much easier if the past were a black hole, if we had amnesia. Bright sun skating its way in fractured kite-like beads through the pine trees outside Susan's house. How many of my memories are created or reinforced by the documentation of them? Do we film events only to be able to see them in retrospect, to see them as though they were the actual moments themselves burned onto our retinas? To see them as though they were really what we saw at the time, instead of just what we imagined them to be? I don't remember anything. I only recall pictures, snapshots of events I may have been present at. Televised pictures of the revolution nowhere near here are mine too. I recall written words of my own past equally with those of times and places I have little business knowing anything about. I've never really been to sea, never driven down an endless straight ribbon of highway into the next state, never floated on a Swiss alpine lake or burrowed deep into the Earth's fossil corridor of time. Is it even possible to reach out and touch another person, to dent their flesh with my fingertips? Why all the conventions, the walls to prevent such happenings? What can you show me? What can I tell you? How many years have we been apart? Where have you been all my life? When can I see you again? I'm sick of the sight of you. All the dicots headbutting one against the other, tearing my soul in two directions at once, ripping at the seams of my consciousness, babbling on and on in my mind.
Okay, we're back.
Yes, we're back. So, we're glad you've survived. We've watched you performing blindfolded. We've watched you wrecking the stage alongside Wolf Eyes and Hair Police. Do you have any strong memories of this night?
The one with Hair Police and Wolf Eyes.
It was the last night.
It was the last show of a joint tour together, like 3-week tour with those two bands. Wolf Eyes are still innovating and making great music these days. I don't know if Hair Police is still around or not, but we were so inspired by what they were each doing that we wanted to do something all together for the last night. And in that period, I had a brand new kind of digital camera at the time. I mean, you can see where the quality is compared to today. But during the last sections of our performance for a bunch of different nights, I was filming from the stage, stop playing when all the anarchy was going on, not only sometimes with just Sonic Youth.
Were you jealous? That you didn't participate?
No, I was
participating.
I was participating. My guitar was making noise too, but I was participating in a different way. And I thought it was interesting to shoot footage from a performer's perspective, as opposed to, you always see footage from the audience perspective, but I wanted to shoot some things on stage. So sometimes I just put the camera down and had it film us across the stage, the 5 of us in Sonic Youth, or there were a couple of rare occasions where we had collaborators on stage, and I decided to film some of that as well.
Mm-hmm. We saw the audience going ecstatic in this this night. So what do you think people get attracted by noise?
I don't think it's by noise.
Like that?
I don't think it's by noise. And
loudness?
And I don't necessarily like the idea of using noise separated from music, because it's an element of music, right? It's not really a ghetto, in a sense. It's because that's often how it's portrayed when you talk about noise. People in the early days of Sonic Youth, the notion of noise as a definer, as an adjective, came in a funny way. There were a couple sort of famous discotheques in New York City in the early 80s where some of the touring bands would play, and maybe Talking Heads or Pere Ubu or whoever was around, but they would never book the downtown bands. And one of the local papers interviewed the owner of one of these clubs and said, why aren't you booking any of these downtown bands? And the club owner was quoted on the front pages saying, well, that downtown scene is just a bunch of noise. And so people got insulted at first, but then they decided to sort of wave it as a flag, in a sense, almost like a fuck you or something.
So he was talking about youth, theoretical
He was talking about, all of what was going on downtown. Yeah, Glenn Branca and Reese Chatham, and Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, all of that stuff, DNA and Contortions. And that summer in 1981, Thurston decided to organize a festival over 9 nights in an art gallery called White Columns in Soho. And he called it the Noise Fest. And it was, again, like a middle finger to this guy from the big, powerful club. And he invited all of the different participants in the downtown scene at that point to play. So Ardo Lindsay played with DNA, also with Ikoue Mori, and Glenn Branca played, and Reese Chatham played, and everybody who was anybody. And it was a chance across 9 nights in the summer for all of these downtown musicians to meet each other. And the banner was noise, but later we came for a brief period to regret it, because all of a sudden people started calling us noise rock. And it may be true and it may be a good phrase, but we thought it was putting us in a little ghetto and saying well, it's not real music, it's small stuff.
So you felt fragmented.
Yeah, in a way. And at the end of those 9 nights, or during those 9 nights at some point, Sonic Youth, Kim and Thurston were just trying to get it started and played a fledgling show there at this Noise Fest. And I was playing with this drummer I was working with from the band The Flux, that was my early band in New York at the time. And Kim said, well, you and Thurston should try playing together sometime and see, she thought we'd play together well. So as soon as this festival was over and they cleared all the gear out of the gallery, we spent the next week or 2 weeks in the gallery every night, just the 3 of us practicing together and playing, and found some things we liked right away. And then went out and played 6 months. For 6 months we played shows without a drummer, just the three of us banging on guitars and doing whatever we could in the earliest period.
Noise.
Yeah, noise, I guess. Yeah. And that's kind of how the band started. So this noise fest kind of immediately led to Sonic Youth's formation in a way.
Okay, let's not follow the Wikipedia path as we've discussed before, and let's start from the present. Where do you live at the moment? Where do you reside?
New York City.
Have you ever left New York City?
Well, as I was telling you before, I moved to New York City in 1979, and I haven't moved anywhere else ever since, but I've spent a lot of time in a lot of other places around the world since then. And so it always seems to be a pleasure to still live in New York, and when I go home, to go back there.
So would you be a different artist if it was a different city other than New York?
Maybe. In the early days, we always felt like what we were doing couldn't have existed anywhere else besides New York, because we were reflecting this city, which in those days was dirty and dangerous and very poor. All those things it's not anymore, because now it's a rich, clean city, and you have to be really wealthy to live there. But back then, young people could move there. Young people are still moving there. They're just moving to Brooklyn and Queens instead of Manhattan. But in those days, the scene was in Manhattan, and all the bands there were reflecting this dangerous, dirty, noisy city. And I think that was part of the interest in that period. You had these people moving to New York, and they weren't kids out of the garage after high school coming out and playing rock and roll in that simple form, These were all kids that came out of universities and came out of art schools or whatever, and came to New York to be painters or writers or directors of cinema or dancers. And yet everyone ended up in the rock clubs because everyone had grown up on rock and roll, and everyone...
CBGB, Max Kansas City.
CBGB's, Max's Kansas City, those were the important places in that early period.
Do you feel comfortable with the revisiting of this period in our decade? There are too many books, too many documentaries, some movies, a couple of TV shows. Do you think that there is an over-mythologization of...
Well, I think it's just a matter of...
this era?
I think it's natural. And I don't revisit it that often, on this tour.
Yeah, you were there.
Yeah, because I was there in a way. And it was one of those scenes in the pre-internet period where if you didn't live in Manhattan then, you didn't experience any of that. There were no newspapers or magazines writing about this music. Rolling Stone wasn't covering the downtown scene. There was no internet to find out anything. So it was a very hermetic little world, As has always been the case up until our internet age. Some little pocket happens in Paris, literary Paris in the 20s, or, wherever you want to call it, these different places happen. And they partly happen because they are isolated and can develop in kind of an isolation. And that's what was happening in New York in that period. And yet New York is such an amazing cultural place that you have this long history of culture on every front, from John Cage, from the 50s, from the Beat Generation to John Cage and Rauschenberg and Johns and de Kooning. And you move there feeling like if you're an artist, you want to become a part of that in a way. And so this is what I was going to say, like all these people moved to New York and became musicians by default because it was easier to get a show at Max's than to get a gallery exhibition or funding for a movie. But, so Jim Jarmusch was in a band, and Vincent Gallo was in a band, and Jean-Michel Basquiat was in a band, and Richard Prince and Robert Longo and Cindy Sherman. Well, maybe not Cindy Sherman, but she was on the sideline of the bands, I think. I don't know if she played in a band or not. But all these people that had aspirations to do other things were doing music and bringing not the garage element of like just got out of high school, got an electric guitar, but bringing all this cultural weight of like knowledge of contemporary art practice and appropriation and minimalism and all of these things that were floating around in the greater cultural world and applying them in kind of a scruffy, punky way
So it's, in a way, they were more experimental. There were no boundaries.
Well, it was a sort of a revisiting of, you talk about nostalgia, because back then, when rock and roll had gotten very bloated, so it was a revisiting of the earliest period of rock and roll, because that was when it was important, when it was very primitive and primal, and you had a rhythmic thing, and you had a beat, and you had somebody screaming or singing over the top, and you had some kind of noise around it, and they wanted to bring it back to that. So you had a lot of these people that were trained artists, but they'd never played a note in their life, and saying, okay, let's start a band. I'll play the drums, you play the bass. And how do you play the bass? I don't know, let me figure it out.
But they had confidence.
They had confidence and something to say, I guess, yeah.
So nowadays, when you're not on tour in places like Athens, what's your daily routine?
Well, daily routine is, you were asking it, some artists have a routine, like I write from 7 to 12, I have lunch, I go back and
I'm not sure if you're working on schedule,
no,
or
I'm
you're
not
waiting
working
for
on
the
a schedule
inspiration
like
to knock
that.
on your door.
I'm not really working on a schedule like that, because in a way life is kind of busy and hectic, so Sonic Youth still has a recording studio, so I'm oftentimes in the recording studio working on stuff, or working on music at home with an acoustic guitar or a little tape recorder, or the recorder on the phone as a document for demos, or I have a painting studio, so I do a lot of visual artwork, so I work in my painting studio, and things kind of bounce around between different things, but there's no real set schedule. Sometimes I'll be working really hard in one area, or you set aside, I'm setting aside the last 3 months of the year to work really hard on the next record. So I know that mostly for 3 months, when I get back from this tour in 1 week, I'll be working on music predominantly. But I'm making drawings and paintings at the same time, and writing some things when I can.
So is it difficult?
Getting the kids out the door to school,
I was waiting for this answer.
Family things, recreational things. I'm a cyclist, so I do a lot of cycling, and so it's a mix of things. In a way, what was the word you used before? How does your work interrupt your life? Was that what you said? Interfere. And I didn't think that was the right word, because in a way the whole thing gets wrapped up together. Okay. It's not like the work is separate from the life, but it's kind of reflects the life and is a part of it. You spend some of your time working. The last piece here is the performance that I still do with my partner Leah Singer. Those are her films. And for instance, for that, like we travel as a family a lot. We go to different places, and she's filming, or I'm recording bells in a tower or something like that, and then integrating those images and sounds back into our performance so that it becomes a bit diaristic or reflective of the different things we've seen and the places we go. And a lot of that is tied to being a family and moving around in that way, or being a couple and moving around in that way. And so it's integrated, I think, is the way to look at it, rather than interferes.
Okay. So is it difficult to develop a separate artistic identity when you were a part of such a mythical group, such as Sonic Youth?
Well, it's interesting, because I never really thought about it at the time until the group was finishing. And first of all, you never expect when you decide to be in a rock and roll band that it's going to last 4 years or 5 years, let alone for 30. And we discovered that we had something magical happening between the four of us, almost in a way that it was greater than the sum of its parts. And a lot of it had to do to our working methods and the way we went about our career. We wrote our music as a group, mostly. Most all of the really important stuff is written that way, and it's not... So it was never like somebody came in and said, like, oh, I've got a new song. It's called Teenage Riot. Here's how it goes. It goes from G to C. Like that almost never happened in 30 years. It was always playing the music, listening to the music, recording parts of it, and then shaping it as a group. So our songwriting had a very unique quality in that nobody wrote it. It was written by a committee in a way, or by a democratic collective. And that made it different than a lot of music to begin with. And the fact that we were working in these strange tunings meant, especially in the first decade, that you could always tell Sonic Youth right away because it just didn't sound like they weren't playing G and C and D. They were playing in all these strange tunings and making strange sounds, which in New York at the time that we started was very normal because everybody was doing something experimental and weird, and we didn't realize it was unusual until we started going out of New York to tour around the U.S. and around the world, and people were like, wow, you guys are doing something real, you're doing it wrong, but it still sounds right, or, you know, I don't know what it was. I had something else to that one, but I can't remember what it was.
About your solo artistic identity?
So, you know, we always had this collective thing, and we all did different things on the side, through, especially in the last half of our career. We were each doing a lot of solo work. But it was interesting when things stopped because all of a sudden, I think each of us, and I know I took on this role of being like sort of the primary creator, songwriter, lyricist, you know, director of production on the albums and things like that. And it was quite a different situation. And so it kind of tapped into different interests of mine. Like I started listening to more of the kind of singer-songwriters that were important to me when I started with music, because they were each presenting one little world. You know, Sonic Youth presented this myriad effect. You know, we liked sculpture and we liked beat poetry and we liked avant-garde cinema, and it was all kind of, and you know, a crime literature or whatever, Jim Thompson, and it was all in the mix of what we were doing. And so it presented like a kaleidoscope. But when you're a single artist, you present more of a personalized view, or this is how I took it at the time. Mm-hmm. And so it was quite a different process. And now, you know, my work has opened up to new collaborators, you know, and that's not something you just snap your fingers and say like, okay, you're going to be my new collaborator. You know, it's like a bit of an evolution to find people that have a similar mindset that you can work well with, and you're interested in pursuing the same things. So it's been kind of an evolution in a way, which has been interesting after 30 years of a group activity. I think actually Kim is the first one that I read something that she said, where she said like, well, you know, for 30 years people liked Sonic Youth, but I didn't know if they liked me, or, you know, because, you know, it was this group thing and you never were sure where you were plotted on the graph of the group. And so it's been interesting to...
But you all released amazing records after the split of the band.
Yeah, I think everybody has. And I think everybody's really dug into this idea of like, wow, now I can devote myself to this without that big distraction of...
Yeah, I was always interested in your interaction with the music industry. I mean, you've all come from this artistic, experimental background, which you described before, but you made it. You established yourselves. You were on national press. You got MTV airtime.
Yeah. So barely.
Yeah. So was it a genius thing of you, or was it a sign of the times?
Well, I think
back
a lot
in
of it was
the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah. I think it was kind of right place at the right time. I mean, we were influential, I guess, in certain ways. What we did was we were doing something different. We were taking this downtown New York sound, and certainly we were bringing it to a wider audience. Most of those downtown bands from the classic period never played out of New York, or barely. You know, television went to Europe once for like a week and a half, and maybe the same with all of those lower Manhattan bands, until Talking Heads and Blondie and Ramones kind of broke through and something else was going on. But in the scene that we were in, we managed to get out of New York earlier than other bands. And, you know, we had ties to some art world people, and we had ties to some music people, and we just kind of kept pushing forward. Just kept moving it along in a way.
And
you know, by the end of the 90s...
Daydream Nation is 30 years old.
Yeah, so Daydream Nation is about to become 30 in a month or two, and by the time that record hit, it was kind of a confluence of issues. Like a lot of, like the majors had started to take a chance on some of these bands, REM and Replacements or whoever, Husker Du. And when we signed to a major label, we really signed for one reason. I mean, obviously there was more money and all that stuff, but we would always go to places on tour. Like, for instance, we came when Daydream happened, that was the first time we toured the whole world. We came here for the first time. We went to Japan and to Russia and Australia. And everywhere we went, people were like, you know, we can't find your records anywhere. Mm-hmm. And the majors said, if you sign with us, we'll make sure the records are in every store everywhere. And that was the most important thing to us, more than the money or any of that other stuff, was the fact that we wanted to get our music out to people. And they helped with that. And so, yeah, we had a major label career for 20 of our 30 years. And yet we also kept one foot in the underground. I mean, I think we had an interesting and unusual case, really, when you think about it.
Did you really help Nirvana make it?
We didn't help that. Well, we helped them get signed. They signed to our same managers first, and then same record label. And they toured with us when nobody knew who they were, and we were, you know, bringing them to people because we knew they were amazing. Mm-hmm. They toured with us before Dave Grohl was the drummer, even. And so we were part of the platform that pushed them to that position, you know. And they would always say, oh, if we could be as big as Sonic Youth, we would be happy. And of course, that's kind of a joke now because they became 20 times bigger. In part because their music was less weird. You know, their music was much more understandable.
Less noisy.
Well, no, it was pretty noisy, but it was just, it was more understandable to your general audience, I think. Mm-hmm. What was great about it was easy to see.
Do you feel that things are more fragmented nowadays?
More?
Fragmented? Because, you know, back in the day, back in 91, for example, you were coming off Goo, Nevermind was released, and it was like the beginning of an alternative nation, as MTV labeled it afterwards. So, do you think nowadays this could happen, or things are more fragmented?
Well, I think it happens. Mm-hmm. I just think it's a whole different game with the internet, because it means, you know, if you're a little young band, no matter where on the planet you live, you can put your music out there for somebody to find in a very easy way. So yes, it is more fragmented because there's way more content and information, but it doesn't mean that every once in a while there's not this swelling of, you know, I don't know when the last real movement was like that, like you're talking about alternative rock movement, but every once in a while there's a swelling around an artist or a group of artists, you know, whether it's Madonna or Kanye or, you know, whatever it is. I mean, there's still this kind of moment where the culture as a collective gets one song stuck in their head or one artist or something like that. But the way it happened with Nirvana was like monumental in a way, and that doesn't happen every 5 years, I would say. It doesn't happen that often.
Do you think that music has still the same significance in youth culture?
I think it does, but I think it's in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Or we're taking it for granted? Well, with all the streaming services.
Yeah, there's a lot more distractions. You know, when I was young, if you got a record, you would only have enough money to buy one record every few weeks, and so you would listen to it obsessively, and you would take it apart, and you would read the liner notes and all that kind of stuff, and get deeply into it. But now we're kind of back in a moment when, like, the 45 single rules, you know, one song at a time rules, and it's interesting. It's definitely interesting. For a while, the album as a format was a very significant thing, and maybe it's less significant right now. When you have artists releasing records and then, you know, two weeks later remixing them and releasing it again, you know, it's the work has a kind of fluid character to it in a way, which it never had in the past. So it's interesting.
This transition to the internet era and the way and the access to everything. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to nowadays, and let's talk a little bit about what you're going to present later.
Oh, I'm going to play songs from my latest record, Electric Trim. It's a solo concert. It's going to be up on the roof. I hope that it's really enjoyable experience up there. It's a pretty amazing view from there. And I've sort of started again for a while in my recent years as a solo artist. I've been playing exclusively acoustic guitar. So now I'm starting to introduce the electric back into it, and that's partly a result of my most recent trio group, which is a little bit more electrified again and has been kind of exciting me a lot right now. So I'm going to present solo songs in electric versions and acoustic versions upstairs, and so there'll be a little bit more improvisation than there has been with the acoustics.
Am I allowed to a rude question?
Will we ever get back together again? Is that it or not?
Let's see. So how did you experience this transition from an underground legend, let's say, to this midlife singer-songwriter?
Well, it was pretty seamless, I have to say, because my first, I've made many abstract records, but I call that my first solo record, Between the Times and the Tides, the one that came out shortly after Sonic Youth finished. But that record was made before Sonic Youth finished. In the last year when we were touring Sonic Nurse, we had a lot of time off, and I just started recording these songs I'd written. And that record was pretty much done almost in the very same period when we all decided as a band we weren't going to continue. So Steve Shelley came along, and we just kind of moved from one performance situation to another. So on the surface, it was kind of seamless. And I think the fact is that for the last 10 years or more, we'd all been doing a lot of solo work. And so I was used to the idea of doing stuff without the band, But and I think sometimes during that same period, each of us individually wished we had more time to devote to some of that solo work, because you never had enough time to really fully develop that stuff. So it kind of presented a new challenge at this late stage in a career after 30 years doing this one thing. I mean, I think it was kind of a very interesting break for all of us, because it put us each to land on our feet and try and push this experimentation forward individually. And I think it's been pretty fulfilling for all of us. People keep asking, you're going to play together again or something like that. And I have to honestly say that I don't think any of us have even thought about it at all, because everybody's so involved in what we're each doing. And you think the Beatles lasted for 10 years and the Velvet Underground for 6 maybe, or something like that. And we lasted for 30 years, and we got to see... It's
quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, we got to see... but it's not just longevity, because I felt that we kept the quality high throughout, and we got to experience and participate in so many different things, from like the early New York scene to the SST California movement, and then Nirvana's situation, and bringing people like as varied as Neil Young or just all, people, musicians from Japan and from France and from all different places around the world. We got a pretty varied experience set in 30 years. Okay. So I think we all feel pretty satisfied. And it's not over when you're in a band for that long. We have a huge archive. We're releasing still archival material and things like that.
Okay, we're still friends. That's good.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I feel we need to talk a little bit about these last 2 videos. The Instagram edit of the blindfolded performance and the last one.
The blindfold performance was done at a festival called No Fun that existed for 3 or 4 years in the, late aughts, like 2008, 9, 10 or something like that. And in the early 80s, when Sonic Youth first started touring in Europe, we had a lot of time sitting in a van, and I was writing a lot at that time. And I wrote a series of proposals for performances, just theoretical, sort of dramatic situations. And one of them was that performer, 3 performers, all blindfolded, 2 drummers and a guitar player. First, one drummer is let out. He can't see where he is. He gets put behind the kid. He starts playing. Then the next drummer, and then the guitar player. And then you see what happens with 3 blindfolded musicians. And I don't know if it's written into the original piece about smashing the guitar or not. But when I finally was able to do this piece many years later at this No Fun Festival, I asked two friends of mine to be the drummers, Pete Nolan from the Magic Markers and experimental drummer named Tom Sergal that plays with Thurston and a lot of other people. He's in a band called Whiteout. And we didn't really know what was going to happen. We had a fourth guy.
That was my next question. If you didn't know what was going to happen.
We didn't know what was going to happen, and we had somebody that we hired to like lead each of us out and at the end take each of us off. And it really was open to question. Maybe it was just going to be an improvisation with eyes closed. You know, you never know. But I had this one guitar that a company gave me that I really did not like. And every time I played it, I was like, I really can't stand playing this guitar. And so I thought, okay, this is the perfect opportunity. At the end of the performance, I'm going to smash this guitar to bits, and I'll never have to play it again. But as it turned out, one of the most interesting things about doing this blindfolded was I couldn't see, but the sense that got lost was time. Because the entire performance, start to finish, was 12 minutes. And it felt like it was a 45-minute performance, in part, I suppose, because of being blindfolded. So when I smashed the guitar, I felt like I'd already been out there for 20... You know, we filmed the whole thing. That's why this is called Instagram Edit, because it's only 60 seconds long for Instagram. And I just did it a few months ago. But we filmed the whole thing, and the idea was to be able to represent it as almost like an art installation with the figure's life size and the viewpoint right from the audience perspective. So we have that movie. But the guitar smashed, and then like I really didn't know where the front of the stage was. I was completely disoriented. And finally, through trying to get more sound out of the guitar, I unplugged everything that I had. Okay. So I was like, okay, it's time to go. And then the guy led me off, and then the drummers were like just getting warmed up. And like Pete got tapped on the shoulder, and he was like, what, you know, what's going on? I just got started. And they were leading him off. And when Tom Sergal was the last one on stage, and when Turner, the guy, went to lead him off, like he didn't want to stop playing. Like he was practically had to pull him off the stage because he felt like we hadn't been out there long enough. So it was a very unusual situation. It's the only one of those 10 or 12 propositions that ever got attempted.
You've mentioned it before. So do you ever want to know what's going to happen at the end?
You want to be able to be surprised all the way through. I mean, yeah, sure. I like to know what's going to happen, beginning, middle, end. But you also want to be able to be surprised, or else you're a robot or something. You know. So you take into account, you know, the special quality of a live performance is that you can't watch it on YouTube and get the same feeling. The performance doesn't stop at the edge of the stage. The audience is an equal part of the participant. And when a performance is really good, it's because the performers are feeling something from the audience, and each is giving the other something that makes it special and makes it kind of lift off as a room in a, you know, mystical or shamanistic way, if you want to get heady about it, but also just in a, you know, a vibey kind of way. So it takes a certain quality to make it happen that you can't ever get by, you know, you watch somebody's gig on YouTube and you understand what they did, but it's, you know, live performance is still a special social situation. You know, we don't even watch our movies anymore in a movie theater, really, which used to be another kind of social situation, 100 people sitting in a room watching a movie, laughing together or whatever. So a live concert is still one of those occasions where you have that intimate, something you can't get out of the internet in a way, or, you know, whatever, out of a book or whatever it is.
We've got this Instagram edit. So do you believe in social media as a means of promoting or disseminating your art?
Well, I suppose so.
Or
I mean, some people use it as
this is a distraction.
No. I'm completely involved in it and absorbed in it, mostly just Instagram. But I love it, and I love it because it's got a predominantly visual side to it. And I think it's, you know, there's people who I think their art exists as Instagram posts, you know, and it's inspiring and interesting to me. So for me, I mean, some people use it, you said the word promoting, and people use it as a promotional tool or an advertising tool or whatever, and I'm coming to your town or whatever, and I do that sometimes, but I'm not very interested in doing that as much as in using it like little haiku or little abstract images or something.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little.
It's a journal.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the last video, because I've read about it, but it's completely different. I mean, you can't get the whole picture, the whole idea, if you don't watch it. This last video with the guitar.
With the
what
hanging
was
guitar.
with the hanging guitar? What was the initial idea?
We did it here in Romanzo Club some years ago. Leah and I have been working together since the early 90s, back when she was carrying two specially modified 16 millimeter projectors, and these days we use video. And at some point, the idea of this hanging the guitar happened, and it's turned the performance into a kind of a theatrical situation. I'm usually in the center of the room with the audience surrounding me, and then sometimes more than one film screen around, so that wherever you're standing, you see me and the swinging guitar, and you see an image behind you. And the guitar can swing and people can interact with it, or I don't know, it's just sort of a challenging situation. It's wireless, so I can take it down and walk around the room, or rub it on the walls, or whatever it is. And
any funny reactions from the audience?
well, funny, sure, I guess so. Just it's an unusual situation, and normally if we do that, we incorporate local musicians wherever we go. So we have 2 or 3 local improvisers, either drummers or whatever. We've had Chinese cellists and all different kinds of things in different parts of the world. But just to add put different instrumentalists around the room and make it an open, people can wander around a little bit. And it comes out of basically this love of like visual imagery and audio art and performance. And, it came about because in the early, on the record we did, Sonic Youth did, called Evol, there's a song called Expressway to Your Skull. And the end of that song is about 10 or 20 minutes of just atmospheric cloud that we get from tapping on the guitar backs with all the amplifiers and everything. And I found that if I leaned forward and the guitar swung off my body, it had more resonance than when it was touching my body, And so at some point with Leah, I said, well, maybe I should just try hanging the guitar, and then I can play it with sticks and play it with the violin bow and with mallets and things. And it worked really well. We really liked what it sounded like. We liked the image it had. It's kind of flying around the room. And so we've just kind of kept developing it a bit. And it's been a really interesting piece to develop.
Okay, since you've mentioned it, I forgot to ask it before. What's your reaction? What do you feel when you see, let's say, a baby, small kid, wearing a baby suit with a goo cover?
Well, I guess their parents were fans.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your relationship with Greece.
With Greece?
Yeah, from the early concerts back in the late 80s to the collaboration with, I see Lakis and Rari somewhere here, with the Callas, and your recent performances.
Well, I've loved this place since I started coming here. Now I'm collaborating with the Callas on a bunch of different things, both myself and with Leah, and we've had a chance to explore a little bit more of Greece through their good graces. We were all on Hydra together 2 years ago, and
The Slaughterhouse.
What?
With the Slaughterhouse.
Yes, exactly. And there's so much history here. This is one of those places where the history just jumps out at you from the streets in a way. And when we first came, we went here, and I think went to Thessaloniki a couple times, but I think there's still a lot more here to explore in a way. So,
did you find any changes in the urban landscape?
Well, I get deeper and deeper into it every time I come. I see more of it, of the city, and more places where there's interesting stuff happening. I've known for a long time about interesting galleries here and interesting people making music here. But it's nice to be here and see what's going on, in person.
Okay, I guess no further questions from me,
Okay.
as they say in the procedural dramas. I don't know if any of the audience has something to ask. Okay.
Here?
Noise.
Yeah, noise. So I'm glad to see you in the flesh, not only on the TV or the YouTube. And well, I have like 15, 20 questions and more, but I'm only gonna ask one.
We just have 15 seconds.
Yeah, man. Okay. So Rain King is one of the most amazing songs. Yes, in Daydream Nation, any record of the last century. How did it come up? Don't say too much because I don't want you to spoil it for me, just the general idea. And I think you had something to do with this, right? More than the others.
Well, we write the music together, but I wrote the words to that one.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
A big fan.
Thank
a
you.
big fan.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can answer the question. Thank you.
President of the Greek fan
You know,
club.
I mean, I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but with that record, we were flexing our muscles in terms of we had the tools to be the composers we wanted to be with that music. That was one of, you know, Sister and that record were really the records where we were taking control of all the tunings we were working with and the different kinds of structures we were working with. And so on that record, we were playing around, on Daydream Nation, we were playing around with a lot of different ideas of song structure and listening to a lot of different things. I think that lyrically, that record kind of coincided with a huge interest in what Dylan was doing with sort of surrealistic imagery in the 60s. And, you know, that's part of the answer. I won't
I
take
think
it
there was
further to
also
spoil
a
you.
book, Ranking, correct?
Not a book that I'm aware of.
Okay. Okay.
I think there is a book
Yeah.
with that title, but it doesn't have anything to do with me.
Okay. But the composition is great, so well done. Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay.
Here.
Hi. She's going to bring the mic. Wait, back. Okay, yeah. Oh, okay. Next, you'll be next.
Hello. Thank you for being here. I'm going to ask you a more general question. Which is your favorite band, and which is your favorite song from other artists?
Well, you know, it's a similar question to asking, sometimes people ask, which is your favorite record that you made or something like that. It's a very hard question because it's hard to have just one favorite in something as wide as music, you know? So which is your favorite band? Do you mean like ever? Ever in
especially in the rock style.
Yeah, but I mean from my whole life?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you're talking about if you mean like right this second today, I would have one answer. But if you mean from my whole life, I think it would have to be the Beatles, because they encompass so much in so many different ways. And I was just old enough to sort of be able to experience their career in real time, you know, as it happened. So for all time, that's probably the answer.
Today?
Today I'm really, really fascinated by and involved with this, the music by this young woman from Chicago. Her name is Haley Four, and she goes by the stage name Circuit des Yeux. It's a French phrase, Circuit des Yeux. And her record last year was just a complete knockout to me. And I've come to know her a little bit, and everything she does is super great, super experimental. She's got a very strange voice, and I just could not hear that record enough last year or tell enough people that I thought it was amazing. So, I mean, right now, she's my favorite band. So, pass it back to her.
Hello.
Hi.
So, if someone told you that in your music, from now on, you can do only the more experimental and weird stuff, or just the singer-songwriting that you do in the recent years, what would you choose?
Well, it's a very hard one, because I've always, and I think Sonic Youth also always chose to do both and
Yes.
never leave one out. You know, we liked to make a racket and play 20 minutes without anybody singing and just play without any idea what we were doing, just respond to each other and improvise. And we really liked playing songs, and we liked playing beautiful melodies and songs that had, you know, the kind of rhythmic structure of a pop song. And so I'm still in that situation. I really like the idea of writing songs, and that's become a new experience as opposed to the songwriting with Sonic Youth, which we talked about. But I don't think I would want to leave either one behind, because they kind of balance each other. So I still do a lot. I mean, like I'm on tour right now singing songs predominantly, but I do a lot of playing and performances that are wholly abstract, like with Leah's films and things like that, or with other improvisers. And I really like to be able to do both, you know?
Since you mentioned the Beatles before,
Yes.
she wrote a profile of you, Eleni, and she called you the George Harrison next to the Lennon McCartney stuff.
Sure.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's, I understand why it's there, because George sang the fewest songs, and that was my role as well. And it is what it is. I always thought we were the new Beatles, so...
Okay.
But
Next.
who's Paul and who's John?
Oh,
I think Thurston is John.
I don't
Kim
think so.
is- No.
I do not think so. I think Thurston is Paul. And Kim is John.
okay, you got the answer.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
It's not the first time, let's say, you're visiting Greece the past 30 years, as far as I'm concerned. One thing I wanted to ask you is how much you feel you've been influenced by Glenn Branca and the way that he composes, the way he freaks out the whole scene and everything in music composition in New York City after late 1970s.
I wanted to start with that clip of Glenn, partly because he's been on my mind a lot because he passed away this year. But also because when we moved to New York, when all of us started coming to New York, he was one of the most powerful forces going in terms of what he was doing. And he was quite a serious composer. I mean, this is a noisy freak out on guitar, but once he started composing for his ensemble, whether it was 6 people or 12 people or whatever, he was very serious about it. And his music was so intense and so radical that it couldn't help but be super influential. I mean, he was a friend. I performed with him in his first great period. He established a label and released Sonic Youth as the first record on his label, and another one on his label as well by us. So there's a lot of history wrapped up between us in a way. And when we moved to New York, this minimalist movement was happening, and you had people like Philip Glass and Steve Reich and Lamont Young or Terry Riley, and you had Glenn and Rhys Chatham kind of doing the same thing, but with electric guitars and a more punky, collar turned up attitude to these other guys. But they all existed in the same moment for a brief period, and there wasn't that much difference. They were minimalists, creating this music. And Glenn's music was so loud. Again, this is back to, if you didn't live in New York,
in many aspects.
Symphonic. He was writing symphonies. He made no bones about it. He called them symphonies. But if you didn't live in New York in that period, you never got to experience it in its true form. I mean, we did a few tours around Europe and the States, but it was still very limited, the audience that witnessed that stuff.
Did you play Ascension?
What? Yeah, Ascension was one of the records that I played on. And the great thing about Glenn is he's another one of these guys that he was a theater person. He came to New York to do experimental theater because that's what he was doing in Boston. And when he got to New York, he was doing these experimental theaters in little black box theaters, and he needed music. And he couldn't find any music he liked, so he started making the music. And then over the course of a year or two, he got more interested in the music than in the theater. But his work always had an extreme dramatic aspect to it. And that was very important to realize, because there's always a drama involved in somebody being on the stage. Whether you choose to try and ignore it and come out in your flannel shirt, or whether you get dressed up like Elton John, or whatever, whether you cut yourself or whatever you do on the stage, there's a drama, even if you do something as little as sitting in 2 chairs like this. So he was very aware of that, and it was really an important realization in that early period that there's this dramatic thing about performing and humans performing for humans.
And as finishing, I mean, somehow for you, in a sort of sense, he defined the whole thing in that part of the music scene of New York City in those days?
Well, he was one of many influences. Let's put it that way. He wasn't the whole thing, but he was a very strong influence personally at that time. But, we were integrating all kinds of stuff. You'd walk down the street and see John Cage or Allen Ginsberg, and we were knowing and understanding what they were doing. And we were fans of the Stooges and the Velvets and, all MC5 and all that kind of stuff. And it was all in the mix. So Glenn was just a really strong element in the mix, and Rhys too.
Okay, if there's no one.
Okay.
Okay. Are guitars still relevant?
Hell yeah.
Big applause.